Goodness. Okay. So I think we're live, and we are with Rick Hassenjager, who is the director of libraries for New York City's Department of Education. Did I say that right, Rick?
I received a title change. I
You
am now
did.
Executive Director of Library Services for the Department of Ed.
So what does that mean?
So within our structure, I was always classified on my civil service title as an assistant superintendent, like all the other executive directors, but I lack the title. And under the new leadership, they hired executive director for social studies, for language arts, for STEM. And one of the things I brought up was, we're on the same pay grade. Why do I have a lesser title? Because what happens is when, let's say, there's something that needs to happen at a school, um, the title actually has a lot to speak to it because it kind of tells you how far removed you are from the chancellor. So within the structure, now I am fourth removed within the levels, opposed to number 5 or 6, because there could be also senior directors between the director and then the director. So um, what it what that title does is just to demonstrate the level of responsibility that you have in the overall cog.
Gotcha. Um, so that doesn't change your position any. It just recognizes your you're on that level with those other folks.
Correct. Correct. So
So
within our structure,
you
we have chancellor, deputy chancellor, senior executive director, and then executive director.
okay. So in terms of what you actually do during the course of the day, so you supervise the people who are the type of people who are finishing this program with me, and you hire these people, and you develop vision, and you work on curriculum that you share with the community. These professionals, you and I have been together at major professional development events. And what am I missing?
Pretty much, I direct the program for all libraries throughout the city.
You do budgeting.
And so in the state of New York, we have school library systems, which other states may not have, um, and we receive funds directly from the state. And we are not a part of the state library. However, there are requirements set by the state library that we need to fulfill. And as a school library system, we not only serve our public schools, but we also serve our private, independent, parochial, charter, and our what we call our DOE schools, the public schools that fall under the what some people would refer to as the Board of Education, even though we
Okay.
don't have a Board of Education. Um, so within that, our primary role is to provide consultation services, support services, and instructional guidance to the overall library program throughout the city. And our main audience, I hate to admit it, are our DOE schools, mainly because the funds come into the DOE. We're Department of Education employees, and all of our reporting structure is to the Department of Education, opposed to the state library or to the independent schools or charter schools. Um, so oftentimes we we create our program objectives and visions um, with with our public Department of Education schools in mind, but yet we also try and make sure that we keep all of our other types of schools close to our hearts so that we don't stray away and lead them astray. So there are some programs that we will only do for our private or our independent schools. But most of what we do is very inclusive. Everyone's invited to everything. So
Mhm.
we're a true community. Um, in New York City, we have um, about 1,600 Department of Education schools, about 200 to 300 charter schools, 1,200 private schools. So we have a total service area of about 300 schools. Within that, we only within the Department of Education, we have a lot of our schools that are located in other locations, in same locations, so we call it co-location, where we'll have 2, 3, up to 10 or 11 schools in one building, and they share one library. So when we talk about sites or libraries, in the Department of, we have about 1,200, and out of those 1,200, we have about 330 certified librarians.
Trying to do that math. Wow. And I just started learning about those buildings that had various different schools in them. That's interesting. So
it's a challenge.
This week, yeah, and I didn't realize that you guys had under your umbrella the parochial schools and the private schools as well.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So this, just to bring it back to this particular group and the group that will likely be watching this asynchronously. One of the things we're going to be discussing next week, and we'll be starting to think about it this week, is how to get hired. How to take what you've learned in this program and your field experience, knowledge, and your personality and your heart and your passion for working with children into getting a real professional job. And I'm going to be asking the students next week, and this in semesters past, Rick, I had them consider this question before they met you. But they're going to likely be interviewing for their professional jobs, and I'm going to ask them next week to think about what they're going to say when the interview asks them, tell us a little bit about yourself, and how they might leverage that question. But I want them to ask you questions about what you're looking for as somebody who hires professional librarians. And then I want you to tell me what the candidate that you're looking to hire looks like. Do you know who that candidate is when they walk in the room? How soon do you know that they're the person you want to hire, and what is it that makes you discover that?
Can we take a step back? I'd like to go ahead and talk about what my role is in the hiring process in the DOE, because our principals actually do the hiring. But what I do, what happens oftentimes is when a principal is looking to hire, they contact my office and they say, Rick, do you know of anyone good out there for us to hire? And what I started when I was in Texas as a director, I've brought up here as well, and I try and locate those people looking for jobs and are applying for librarian positions, and I do a screening interview with them. And it's really helpful for myself and them, because oftentimes the people that I screen are early in the season, so our hiring season pretty much is just now starting, but I start screening people back in January. And so for somebody who is either new to the profession or has been in another position for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and hasn't sat through an interview recently, my interview kind of helps put them at ease and think about the question, because I'm not the person doing the hiring. Instead, I'm just looking for key functions and their strengths, meaning I'll ask a series of questions on various library-centric topics. And what that does is it helps me determine what their strengths are, so that when I have that conversation with the principal and I say, well, what are you looking for? Because they'll say, do you have anyone good? And I go, well, that depends. What are you looking for? What's your vision of the library? And in order for me then to play the role of matchmaker, which is what I take in this, then I try and identify those candidates that are strong in the areas that they need. So, for some schools, their need is a strong technology partner. For others, it's a literacy partner. For another, it's about inquiry, because they're maybe have a lot of AP classes and they're doing a capstone project at their school and they want the librarian to be a part of it. And it could be that the principal really doesn't know what they want. And this is my opportunity for the principal to start thinking of, okay, when you interview, you need to come up with your plan of what do you want this library to do. Otherwise, you're hiring blindly and you may or may not end up with the person that you want. So I wanted to just put that out there to begin with to let everyone know I don't actually do the hiring for those positions, but I do play a role in the hiring process.
Gotcha.
Can I take it one step further back than that?
Sure.
When you don't know a person, are you screening candidates based on personal connections, or do you look at cover letters and resumes? And if you look at cover letters and resumes, what makes one stand out from another one?
So I do. In fact, I've posted our recruitment efforts on our New York listservs. I know that I've passed them on to Joyce. I believe they've gone out to Rutgers people because I've received a few candidates from New Jersey this year. And I asked for a cover letter and a resume. I do that for two different reasons. One, I want to make sure that they meet our minimum criteria. If they don't meet the minimum criteria, then I don't offer a screening interview. Believe you me, with the number of schools we have, I don't have the time just to do a courtesy interview. And I don't want to waste a person's time to come into Manhattan for an interview if they're really not qualified. So I use the cover letter and the resume to help decipher what that is. But beyond that, I do take some quick notes, and I keep a spreadsheet of all of the individuals. And so I note what is their pedigree. That's what I call it. Where did they go to school? And that way it may give me an idea of where some of their strengths may be before even the interview. Because I know various library schools have different emphasis. Mm-hmm. I typically know that if I'm interviewing a Rutgers a Rutgers graduate, that they're going to have a stronger sense of the inquiry model and process. And but if I'm interviewing someone from another university, and I won't name other universities just out of politeness, I know that they may have a stronger children's literature or young adult literature program, and they're going to come out with a very strong, or I should expect a strong, literature background within their degree. Some of them, I know that they're following this this model of thought. So I should be expecting certain things, and these are from new graduates. Graduates that, a candidate that graduated from library school 5, 10, 15 years ago, they could be anywhere in the spectrum, and it doesn't matter where they're at. But a new graduate, you pretty much know where their strengths are going to lie. If I didn't even look at I didn't look at the resume before they sat down, I could probably guess to which university they earned their credentials from. That's how close I think I am to that. So what do I look for in the resume and the cover letter? First of all, I look at the mechanics. If I see misspellings, if I open up the Word document and I see that they pressed an enter key after every line and they used the word processor like a typewriter, I catch onto that real quick because I have my Word set up so I see formatting. So I can see, did they really use Word like a word processor or more like a typewriter? And it's very curious when you get candidates that you can tell they haven't even mastered the basics of Microsoft Word. So just be sure that for the people that send me a PDF of their resume and their cover letter, I can't figure that out. So I always recommend that people send PDFs opposed to Word documents as in your position, just because it's less likely people can figure out what's behind your mind when it comes to that part of technology. Plus, it also protects you and your credentials, meaning that no one has the opportunity to change anything or edit anything without your knowledge. So I strongly encourage people never to circulate a Word document of their resume and cover letter, but it is always a PDF unless they specifically ask for something in Word.
Good. So, but what makes one pop? If you probably have piles when you get these. And what makes you put that cover letter and resume into the must-see pile?
Um, a clean format. I'll be honest. Having some type of instructional background, it doesn't necessarily mean that you were a classroom teacher, but that you have evidence that you've worked with children more than just your student teaching, whether it was volunteer, whether it was actual work experience, things of that nature. So I'm looking, since we're school librarians and we're looking for people to work with children, I first look to see how have they done that. If that is, let's say, missing, the next thing I look for is how often have they worked with adults? And by that I mean, do you have experience training adults, teaching adults? So maybe there's something that I can determine if there's some adult learning theory behind you. Because one of our roles as librarians is to be professional development providers to our staff. So I'm looking for a range of skills. If another area I look at is technology skills. I do want to see a variety of different web tools that you may use. I want to know if you don't know LibGuides, do you know how to set up a wiki? Do you know, because a lot of those skills are transferable, so it isn't about the tool itself, but it's do you have experience using a variety of tools so that I know that you can work in different environments over time.
So is a portfolio important? Do you want to see a link to a portfolio, or is that too much information?
It depends. If the portfolio is more than just coursework, then I'd like to see it. If it's just the coursework, I can really see that, oh, this was for an assignment. And I want to see something more than assignment. I want to see something authentic. That's just me. I know that principals have a different view. I'm looking at things beyond just the first year teacher type of things, even though that's what your students will be and what you will be are those first year people. To me, when I put on a different lens when I'm interviewing a person coming out of a program, is that I put a lens on, were they really listening to what I would consider the movers and shakers in our community? So, I'll ask a question about research models, and I'll ask, which ones are you familiar with? Not necessarily the ones that you've used, but which ones are you familiar with? And I actually frame it around inquiry models instead of research models. But sometimes I have to kind of dumb down the question to research models in order to get what I'm looking for. And, if they mention guided inquiry, I'll say, so who was the principal person responsible for that? And I want to know, do they really know it, or do they just remember the topic? And then I'll ask for an example of. And my questions scaffold upon each other, that I don't throw that question out first. Instead, we build to it so that you kind of have this frame of mind of where you are with that.
So I think, Rick, one of the things that I think is important, that you are a knowledgeable interviewer, and a principal might not know to ask those questions, but I think it's important to actually be able to work what you know into an interview, even if that question is not explicitly asked. A principal may not know that he or she is looking for that, but would be very, I think, happy to discover that you've got this under your belt.
Right. So, there are certain skills that you want to highlight, whether they ask the question or not, and you want to embed it into several different questions. So technology is one of them. How do you use technology? So that if they're asking you a question about a lesson that you've presented to a group of students, whether it was in your student teaching or in some other experience, you want to talk about the technology that you used in that, because they want to know that we're investing a lot into our technology, and they want to make sure that they're hiring people that know how to use various different types of it. If, let's say, you haven't done that with students necessarily, you might talk about your personal experience with technology. How familiar are you with apps that have to do with education or teaching and learning? What apps do you use on a regular basis for your own learning? And oftentimes those things can translate into other things. So an example would be, more and more of our schools are becoming Google sites. So do you know Google Drive and apps and all of those things, or do you use Google Docs as a collaborative workspace? And if so, how would you manage that in that space? If I would also make sure that there's points in time that you always embed something about culture of reading within the school. So even though they may not explicitly state it, I think all principals would say, yes, we would love all of our students to read more outside of the school day. So you would have to talk about, what am I going to do as that person that's in the library to encourage others to read? Yes, book talking is a great way to do that, but what programming would you do to align with that? What would you do over and beyond just the fiction section's over there and these are the top 5 authors in our school? What would you do to make that number 25th author now the second favorite author in the school? What would you do to make sure that the collection represents your community and meets the needs of your students? So if they don't explicitly ask that, what they may say and what they may ask instead would be, how will you work with teachers to ensure our students are successful? That's a very broad question. And one of the things that you might want to do is kind of, in your mind, have a checklist of, okay, if that question was asked, it's so broad, you might start by saying, I would do that in 3 different ways. And you first go ahead and list the 3 bullets and then revisit each one of them, because then that way, if you're anything like me in an interview, you start to forget and you wind down this trail that you can't be sure of, and then you can go back. Oh, and then the second point was, so then you don't have to worry about the transitions into those 3 different points. So that's just a technique I think you should keep in your back pocket.
Sounds good. I have loads of questions, but I'd rather have my students ask them.
Okay.
I know that I believe that only one of you already has that professional job. I may be wrong about this. Anyway, nailed is the qualifying word. You're facing this interview thing, and so what's on your mind? What are you thinking about? What do you want to know about what it looks like from the other side of the desk?
So when the question comes up about culture of a school, or what questions do you have for us, that sort of ending interview question, are there questions you should avoid?
I would say anything, I'll tell you the best one. I hate to go to the void because each interview is a little different and each interviewer is a little different themselves. But I think the best question, I think you should only ask up to 2. You should not ask any more than 2 follow-up questions. At that point, I see that as you're not certain of what you want, or you're going to be extremely picky. And if you're this picky in the interview and this high maintenance, I don't know if I can handle you on a day-to-day basis. I'm just going to be honest with you. So I think the best question that you would ask is, what is your vision for the library? What are you looking for? And that alone should give you enough information to tell you what they're really looking for. And I can tell you that that was a question I used at the second school that I was a librarian at, and the response by the principal, and this was an expect a committee of people. If you only interview with one person, that's an oddity anymore. But the committee that I interviewed with, the principal said, that's a great question. She said, I don't know what a librarian does, but I know when I see what I like, she goes, but what I'm really looking for is a professional to really guide exactly what the program should look like. So my vision is that I hire a professional that knows what a great library looks like and functions, and that they work with the teachers to make that happen. For me, for my personality, that was like the best response I could have ever received from her. For other people, they would have said, oh, that principal lacks vision or direction, but the questions that led up to that pairing that with the questions they asked, I got a sense of, I knew the type of person they were looking for from the questions. For instance, one of the questions was, would you use puppets and things to entertain students in the library? And Joyce probably knows me well enough that that is not who I am. I am not that puppet person. And I said, I need to be completely honest. I said, if you're looking for somebody to entertain children with puppets, I'm not your person. If you're looking for somebody to increase the rigor of what's happening in your school and work with teachers on research projects and providing great literature for children, that's who I am, but I'm not a performer. So, and as soon as I said that, one of the panel people said, well, it looks like we don't have our first librarian back. That's a good thing. So it was really a test question. So you never know why they're asking the question. When they ask the question at first, I'm like, okay, this is a pre-K through 5 school. It's in this very suburban school district outside of Houston. My gut was telling me, yeah, they're looking for somebody to play with puppets. And I just had to tell them, I had to be honest and say, that's not who I am. And that's part of what you need to do in an interview, because if you present a false portrait of yourself, there's going to be some expectations that are set that you may not either philosophically align to or that you just can't measure up to. And I think it's really important to be honest throughout the interview. You don't have to put yourself down. If, let's say, you don't know an answer, you don't need to say, I'm sorry, I don't know that. You might ask them to rephrase it another way. You may say, I've had limited experience. That's better than no experience, and it's not quite a lie. I've had limited experience with that, but I'm willing to learn more about it. Or you might ask them to describe what they're asking. But be careful how much you do that. If you do that for every single question, then it's a flag of, okay, you don't know your craft yet. But it's okay to say, I have limited experience, and make sure that you speak up and say what you are good at. So if, for an instance, if they asked you, are you familiar with the Code X curriculum by Scholastic? That's one of the curriculums that our schools adopted. You may say, I'm not all that familiar with that one, but I am familiar with X, Y, and Z. And what I do know is that from curriculum, you first have to look at standards, and you have to look to see where they're based out of to get a better understanding. So for me, I've used several different curriculums in the past, or I've been exposed to various curriculums in the past. And with a little time and effort, I've been able to match resources and instructional objectives with those areas or those programs. So you turn that negative into a positive by saying, you own it. You say, I don't have that much experience, but I do have experience with these similar types of things, so that you can show that the skills that you have are transferable, so it doesn't matter which package they give you. When you open it, you know how to pull it apart and use it.
Good. So you're also, there's part of this that is kind of under, beyond the questions. And so you're demonstrating dispositions and characteristics that are also valuable beyond the questions. So that response is a demonstration of agility, and also a willingness to learn. In addition to sharing that, you have some other things behind in your experience.
One other piece of advice I'd give you as well is to leave your baggage at home. Everyone has worked for a bad boss sometime in their life. Sometime in their life, unless you've never worked, you've had a bad boss or the worst boss. If you've worked in 2 different places over time, you favored one boss over the other. And if you dwell on the negative one, it certainly comes through. And for me, my gut tells me, I see that as negativity. I see that as somebody that really wants to dwell on what's bad and not find solutions. So, for instance, 2 weeks ago, I screened an individual who I could tell was in a very bad place. Not once did she tell me. Not once did she throw her boss under the bus. Not once did she blame something on someone else. And at one point, was talking about reading motivation, and she brought up AR, and I said, well, I can tell that's what the school wants you to use. And I knew the type of school she was in, and okay, I'll tell you, it was a charter school. So she currently works in a charter school, and she's talking about AR and how they're using it. And I said, what's your philosophy about AR? Do you see that as a motivational reading tool? And she said, well, where I'm at, that's not my decision to make. And she said, so what I'm trying to do is to make the best out of it. And she said where she was trying to guide it. And what I really liked is she never said, I'm made to do this. She never said, I don't want to do this. Instead, what she said is, this is what I've been given. I'm trying to make changes to it that I think are good changes within the constructs I have. And there were several times in the questions, and at the end I gave some feedback to her, and I said, so-and-so, I said, I can tell that you're most likely very miserable where you're working. And she just started crying. And she said, how did you know? And I said, not once did you tell me that, but your responses were, I need to get out of this place because I have a skill set that isn't being recognized. And I'll tell you what, for that person, I'm going to do all I can to find a placement for her because she is willing to do whatever it takes to be a part of that team. And that's what a principal really needs to find, is somebody to do whatever it takes. Not that person that says it's not my job, not the person that says, oh, the librarian shouldn't be teaching a class on, word processing or something. Now, it doesn't mean that we just throw away our kingdom or our expertise, but it's the how do we structure what they need into our realm, and how do we move it in that way. So, for instance, at my level, I've taken on projects. So in Northeast ISD in San Antonio, when I left, I was not only over libraries, but I was also in charge of formulating our plan for online learning for the entire district. Well, online learning is not a library responsibility when it comes to curriculum and development, curriculum development and design. But what I recognized is if the person in the library didn't have their finger on the pulse, or more importantly, guiding the bus, libraries were going to be left out of all the online curriculum that was being built, as it had been in most districts up to that time. That was during my last 6 months that I was there. I don't know what it looks like today because there was new leadership and other people in that position, but there were times when I went ahead and I said, okay, I'm going to drive this one because I feel it's so important that if I don't, I might get left out. So sometimes you just have to be very willing to assume some different things that you don't think that you would ever do.
What other questions do you have of Rick about resumes, interviews, the job hiring process? It looks like Mary has a question.
Hi, I'm Mary. I went into library science immediately after my undergraduate, and I have some experience working with children and working in the library through volunteering and such. But how do I make my resume and cover letter stand out when I don't have a ton of actual classroom experience?
What's your passion? Let me ask you that first. What's your passion?
My passion is literacy and teaching others how to find out the information they need and want to learn.
So what you need to do is you need to structure something within the resume that really speaks to your passion. And I think but your response is so broad to me yet. And so I think you need to hone in on exactly what part of that, because I would choose one passion. Is it the literacy? Is it the information literacy, or is it the literature? Which one do you think you align to closest in your heart?
Probably literature, just because I love stories so much. So information literacy, finding the stories through that. So
and then knowing that it's the literature, which literature are you most attracted to? Children's or young adult?
I'm good with either, but particularly middle grades, like when you're right in between children's and YA.
So that grades 5, 6, is that more of what you like?
Yeah, 5 through 8 is about my favorite area, because they're people are at different levels and they have so many different interests, and just the wide variety of interests and passions with the students is so amazing and shows such a broad world.
Okay, so right now what that's telling me is that you're really like in the early YA literature. You're liking that middle grade. Typically what I find in middle school people, and I'm going to be honest, based on your response, I expected you to say middle school. I don't know why, but I just was expecting middle school. That did not surprise me one bit. But what I think you need to do is within your objective or in your cover letter, you need to talk about continuing reading for these middle school readers, because I think when you're looking for your job, you're not just looking for a job, but you're looking for the job that's going to be satisfying to you. If you just go after any job and you take the first one that you get, if it isn't what you were looking for, you're not going to be happy. And then that starts you on a bad precedent for the rest of your professional career. So you really have to be thinking of, which type of school am I really going to target? I'm going to target it hard. And for you, I think you're going to target that middle school. Within the cover letter, you're going to talk about how middle school students start to lose that that love of reading that they may have had when they were younger. For other kids that have never loved reading, they're falling further and further behind in their schooling, and that you're there to build their passion in learning new things through reading, and that would be through various programming. So you want to give some specific examples of how you would get kids that either are non-readers to readers, or those that have read and have been readers, and now they're busy in sports, they're busy with other organizations, they're busy with homework. How are you going to capture them and bring them back to reading? So you need to think about that. So that's why I was asking for passion, because you can write to passion. You can express your passion. But if you try and lump too much into it, what you're really doing is saying, okay, I'm passionate about the job description because I want a job. Well, what part of the job are you most excited about? And that's what you want to highlight. You want to highlight the part that you're most excited about. And don't worry about if not every school aligns to what your passion is. What you're going to do is you're going to signal your story to those people that are most receptive to what you want to do. And in the end, if they're happy with what they're receiving and you're happy with what you're getting, it's going to be a nice place for you. For us in New York City, I'm trying to help bridge that gap between the applicant and the principal. So today I emailed 4 different principals with resumes of people that I thought could be good matches to them. And it was based on what I perceived as their strengths, and through my interview, I could tell what their passion was, or through their cover letter.
Thank you.
So it sounds to me like you're expecting to see a little bit of a story in a cover letter. So
Yes.
that maybe it doesn't need to be a repeat of the resume or the CV, but here's how, and I think one of the things I've heard from you before, Rick, is don't tell me that you're in librarianship just because you love reading.
I was going to bring that up if you didn't.
Why don't you talk about that? But I want other people to think about questions. But I think it's a little tiny story, and like devote one of your paragraphs to something that is truly intriguing and engaging, rather than just a narrative outline of what you've already got in your resume.
So, you had mentioned before to everyone, think about that first question of, tell me a little bit about yourself and why you became a school librarian. I'll be honest, that is my first question. So if you were to come in and screen with me, that would be the first question you receive. And that's true for most any place that you go to interview. And, I end up with a wide range of answers. And I actually score things on a rubric. And when somebody says, I became a librarian because I love reading, and that's all they give me, I'm saying, so what do you think the job is? That you sit behind a desk in your office and read all day? Is that all? Otherwise you might want to become an editor, because they read a lot too. so you need to be able to tell us why it's that school librarianship over other jobs on earth that, you could be a professional book reviewer and you wouldn't have to be a librarian to do that. What is it that attracted you to this profession? There are certain elements that I would look for that, but I'm not going to share those with you right now because I want you to think about it a little bit before I do.
That's provocative. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Do you either have any more questions of Rick, or do you have any ideas for how to answer that question in a way that avoids the response that Rick was discussing? Let me know.
In fact, Joyce, didn't last time we asked down the line everyone that same question and asked everyone to answer it for us?
Yes, we did. I know that people are a little bit shy because of the broadcast, so I could stop the broadcast and we could do that. I wonder how people would feel. Can you give me a visible thumbs up or thumbs down on this one? I can't see. Let me make sure I can see your thumbs. I can't see a single thumb.
In the middle.
It was in Madeline Hunter, right?
I'm seeing more thumbs up.
Okay, I don't see anybody's thumbs, but okay. So let's go down the line. Anybody want to start with tell me a little bit about yourself story?
I'll bite the bullet. I would say that initially I got into this because of the cheesy canned answer. I love reading, but I think it's grown into so much more for me as I've gone through the program. I've really come to, I don't think that I ever had a strong understanding of guided inquiry. I don't think I was ever taken through the process of how to research, and I feel like that has left me with such a gap that I don't ever want a child to experience that having come through my library. And I would really like them. I also, very much like Mary, I'm in the middle school right now, and I'm really loving this age level, which I did not expect. I've taught kindergarten for 15 years, and I was so used to handing them everything. And this is kind of like that middle ground where I am still really holding their hand as I'm guiding them through this beginning, but at the same time they're taking it and making it their own. I'm loving this age. So it's a really cool process to see. I don't know if that's an answer, but that's mine.
I'll give feedback at the end. How does that sound?
Sounds good, Rick. Who would like to go next? Looks like Mary's next.
I became a librarian studying school media because I hated reading until I was 10 years old. Absolutely hated it, and it was very difficult for me. I had a slight reading spurt at the age of 10, but I always grew up knowing that stories were important and the library was a safe place for me to explore things I loved. And because middle school is that age where you could become a lifelong reader, or you could just stop reading altogether besides when you need to, just that age group I really know is important, and I want to show that reading is another way to find stories. Reading is a way to find out more about your passions.
Okay, would anybody else like to try this? And it's okay to back out if you want to. But I just want to give people a chance if they want to.
Crickets.
Yeah, crickets indeed. We've heard that more than once this semester, haven't we? I'm coming from a completely different background than most of my classmates. I have a career in instructional technology. So for the last 10 years, I've been teaching teachers how to integrate technology into the curriculum. And my library colleagues would occasionally say to me, Liz, you should become one of us. And eventually I decided, not having a teaching certificate, that I needed to go back and get one. And the technology graduate degrees were I'll say, outdated and very expensive, and I could teach myself those skills much faster and much cheaper than going and getting a graduate degree. So I applied Rutgers, got in, and have discovered this whole other world that I happen to love a lot. Right now I have a job as a K through 5 librarian, which I never ever would have dreamed I ever would have loved. But just watching how kids engage with a library, engage with books, engage with each other, ask critical questions is just the most wonderful thing. Far better than teaching adults. That's my spiel.
Okay, any other takers before we go to Rick's critiques?
I think I'll go.
Okay, Becky. I don't think I can.
I don't think you can hear me.
We can now. And Lisa, I will archive this, so I'm so sorry you can't hear right now, but we'll hear it later. I'll make it private within our own community.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm having trouble with my bandwidth, I think, here. But I find it very fulfilling to create a safe environment for young people to learn and find answers. Because I don't sometimes asking is the biggest barrier to learning, because if you don't know where to find the information, you can't find it. And if you don't feel comfortable asking someone for it, then you just never, you won't find it as quickly, or you won't get what you need. So that's what has drawn me to librarianship, is being able to help people find the answers to whatever question. It could be a personal question or an academic question, or something as simple as finding a book that will take my mind off my problems. So that's why I went into it.
Okay. All right, do we have any other takers before we move back to Rick? And I think Lisa's having trouble with the sound, so maybe we should just go back to Rick.
Okay. First thing I want to say is thank you for keeping them brief, because they usually start the question with, briefly give me your background and why you wanted to X, Y, and Z. If it takes more than 2 or 3 minutes, you've talked too long. Because they really want to get into the content of the questions, but they want to also just get a sense of who you are before they start. I would, Liz, I think Liz is the one. Yes. So Liz, what I liked about what Liz did is she created a story about it. She really made it personal and made it kind of say, I was in this other area, and then I saw what I really wanted to do, and then I pursued that path, and now I know this is what I want to do. So if you were to take a script and think of a series book, it's all different words and one thing after another. I think one thing that you could take away from Liz is how do I create a story about that, and how do I do that in a very brief moment, saying at one point in time I was this, then I saw this, I pursued it, and now I know this is what I want to do. And that's what I liked about Liz's, because I could see that process of self-acquisition. Okay, my speech impediment's going to come in here. Her awareness of self comes through very well. Thank you. But her awareness of self was very much there, and that out of the ones that I heard, I was able to connect more with her just because of that. Now, I could be that I'm selfish, because I originally went into librarianship because I thought I was going to go more into the technology end and eventually be more of a tech facilitator or something for a school. The librarian left. They needed a new librarian. Principal knew that technology was my thing. Moved me into that position. I started my master's work, finished my degree while I was serving as the librarian in that school. And I was able to see a different path by the time of my end of the coursework. What I thought I was getting into wasn't exactly the same as what I came out of. And what I really came out with was more of a passion for how do I engage students into thinking more deeply about their work, opposed to just using technology or just checking out a book or using an encyclopedia at the time. But what I came out of it was, boy, I really can make a difference, and this is how I can do it. So for some of the other responses, first of all, I want to say I heard no bad responses, so that's a good thing. So I want to start with that. The others, I think if you embedded a little story or more of that progression of how you got to where you are today would make you feel more comfortable in one way, because I think a couple of you, I could really tell that you stumbled, and yes, you kind of knew what those bits and pieces were, but you didn't know how to frame it around a story. And I could see you struggle a little bit. And even though I could tell what you were wanting to say, and I wanted to put words in your mouth, you need to be a little clearer in that, and just know that this is going to be the first question about any interview that you go into. And if you spin the first question that is what should be expected, and by the way, it may not be, but I would say most people interviewing will ask that as the first question or somewhere in the interview. That if you fumble around on that one, then they'll start to wonder, do you have a vision for what you want to do? Because I think that telling why did I become a school librarian is really your vision statement. What is it that you want to do? Where do you want to take other people? So that's just a little feedback that I wanted to give you as a whole. I kind of learned on my own that when I was applying for director positions before I became a director, and Joyce, I don't know if you know this, my first interview was actually in Indiana when I was still in Texas, at Carl Harvey's school district. I interviewed there, and Carl Harvey was one of the people that I interviewed with while I was up there. And that was my first interview for a directorship position. Ended up not getting the position mainly because I was told that a consultant was hired. They said they didn't need that position. This district wasn't large enough, so they did away with it. In my heart, I'm saying, oh my goodness, I hope I didn't leave such a bad impression that they decide they never needed a director again. And then but that interview was so important for me for growth because I didn't know what to expect. I then did an interview at a regional service center in Texas, which in New York it's similar to BOCES, or it's a regional education center that provided services to multiple school districts within a geographic area. And in that interview, I had become confident enough that halfway through the interview, I could tell they weren't really interviewing for what I thought they were interviewing. And I actually stopped the interview and I said, you know what, I think we're wasting each other's time because I can tell this is not a position that's going to meet my needs. And I left. Of course, they were dumbfounded and couldn't believe somebody stopped an interview. And they did, before I left, they said, well, why are you saying that? I said, because all of your questions are about how can I support math and how can I support language arts, and not about how can I embed library programs into that. So what you're really looking for is somebody to live in 3 different worlds, and I'm not willing to do that. And it ended up being the person that they hired, I think, ended up realizing real quick that's what they wanted. And then after that, I interviewed at San Antonio in Northeast, and once again, I knew the minute I walked out the door that if they offered me the job, I'd take it. And that's really your cue as when you're interviewing. If you leave the building, and whether you're getting to your car or getting on a bus or wherever you're headed, if you leave that interview and you say, if they offer it to me, I'm going to take it, that is the best sign. Now, if you leave that going, I think it went okay. Yeah, I hope it went okay. Really in your heart you're saying it's okay if it's not okay. But when you leave and you say if they offer it to me, you know right away that could be a good fit for me. That so go with your gut. Go with your gut on that.
Yeah, there's some did you guys get anything from this that you can bring into your first interview or next week's assignment? I hope so. And a number of you were saying in the chat that this is similar. We looked at advocacy. We were talking about Dan Pink and the power of story, and we were looking at the arc of a story and the Pixar pitch and how that works. So it's good to bring all these elements into your personal story, which is what you're sharing at this interview. You're sharing a whole bunch of things at this interview, and one thing I hope that is fairly obvious, and just about a little more than a year ago, I was in the position of hiring somebody for my own position with the team, as Rick said. In this case, there were maybe 10 people around a large table, and it must have been incredibly intimidating for every candidate who walked in. But one of the things we were disappointed in was that there were people who came in and knew nothing about our school, didn't bother to look at our website, didn't bother to understand the community and its culture, didn't check our school or our scores, didn't know that we had a really awful football team but had a great spirit, but we were great in the arts, that our school was really known for visual arts and performing arts. And we'd hope that people came in, had been to the library website, even if they couldn't get physically into the library. And so people who came in knowing nothing about us made us feel insulted, and that we didn't care, that they didn't care. So there were those things. And Rick, one of the things I noticed in this hour that we've been together is that you mentioned the word passion a whole bunch of times.
I can teach people skills. I can't teach them passion.
But you know it when you see it, right?
You know it when you see it. There's are a couple other things that I want to just put out there, and you may have discussed this somewhere within the class at some point. In an urban setting like New York City, they may not know to check, but we do our best principals. First thing they do, they check your digital presence. They would look at your digital footprint. They'd look to see, do you have a Facebook? What's on your Facebook? If they Google your name, what comes up? So there are ways to help yourself make sure that your privacy settings are set correctly on Facebook and other social media, that if there are things that you don't want other people to know unless they're your true friends, you're going to hide it. Check it often, because Facebook and other providers change their terms of use and revert things or change things and open things up that you don't think they do. Just be very aware of that. Make sure that you've done a search on your name. See what comes up. Know what Google says about you. I check mine on a regular basis so that there's no conflicting information there. Nothing's incorrect. I want to make sure that, if I search for my name, hopefully my professional Rick comes up first before my personal Rick. So that and at this point in time, you may not have a lot in that part of the portfolio, and I understand, and I do not mean for you to go out tonight, create a website, create a digital presence just to do it, but just be aware of what it says about you. But also be very aware that if you are, let's say, a current blogger, and you've blogged quite a bit, that you might want to go back and reread any of your posts and decide, do I need to hide anything, suppress anything, just because, let's say there was something on testing in your state that you were objecting to, or maybe teacher evaluation. I'm just throwing those out there because those are all issues in our city. And you were very vocal about a point of view. I'm not saying which point of view you take, because everyone on those types of issues, somebody may agree with you instantly and say, I love you. Other people may say, I disagree with you. But at heart, if I post anything on a blog post, usually I do it just to excite people and get people thinking. And I could care less. I mean, of what your personal opinion is, just as long as I don't have to think the same way as you. Just be very aware of what you have on yourself online.
And you can control. It's important to do the damage control or prevention that Rick described, but there's also a proactive approach. So if you're going to be corresponding with these people who have power to hire, make sure that the SIG in your email leads people to the good stuff about you, so that you're leading them directly to your LinkedIn profile, your About Me profile, your CV indirectly maybe, or directly. But it is pointing people to the stuff you want them to discover. Make sure that there's redundancy, that your LinkedIn profile leads to whatever it is you want them to discover, your About Me profile leads to your CV, or all that stuff. And also watch the photographs. I mean, I really think that could be the kiss of death. As a mother, when I discover my kids are dating people, I'm absolutely all on to see this. And honestly, some of these people are probably fine young men and women, but those photographs can be very disturbing.
Damaging.
Yeah, and I probably am misjudging lots of really fine young men and women, but you can hire 1,000 people. Why would you hire the one you have doubts about? So I think Rick's advice is really good. My son, in fact, deleted his entire Facebook profile, his entire Facebook presence, and you can actually toggle it on and off. But he deleted. You can leave it, and then you can go back to it and bring it back up with its archive and history. But he intentionally built up his LinkedIn stuff and deleted Facebook, and before he got his really good job. And I was very impressed with that, because he invested a lot in the friends that he made and stuff. But he also intentionally posted professional articles and really created some substance before he really dug into this job search. But you can control it, and you can create some balance there. And the fact is, I think, Rick, and I don't know if this is true, but people make mistakes, and this is where we've grown up in the early part. We've grown up through the development of social media, and there's stuff out there I wish I'd never said. But I think in balance, I've said more good stuff than bad stuff, and I'm hoping people will weigh this stuff and forgive some of my indiscretions, because they're there,
And if they are, you have to own it. And I think the important part is, if it does come up, you're able to explain, yes, I said that, and I've changed, and this is how I do it now. I agree with you. And actually, I sat in at Queens College last week for their student organization, had a panel of hiring directors there. For various academic, school, public, and special libraries. I was on a panel with them, and it was really stressed that if you don't have a LinkedIn page, you need to add that to your portfolio. LinkedIn is extremely important in your job search.
It is the people search tool, and I'm going to be rewriting our search course. And I'm absolutely putting that in as, a unit in search strategy, one of those specialized search tools. But it is really important. I want to respect Rick's time, and we're nearly done. So does anybody have any final questions for Rick before we say goodnight?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Rick, what would you say the percentage would be of people who do not get the job?
See, in New York City, it's hard to say, because we have so many openings, we didn't have enough people to fill them, to be honest. I had 6 high schools that wanted to hire last year. We couldn't find the candidates that were willing to work where those schools were located. So last year, we had 41 applicants. Conceivably, we have 600 positions. We had 41 applicants. Of the 41 applicants, 12 of them were not certified, so they were tossed out. That left us with 28 applicants. And out of the 28, 16 of them were placed in places that I thought they were in good place with. We had another 4 or 5 that I would have loved to have placed, but they took jobs in surrounding areas. And the other 4 or 5 people that were left over, frankly, were people that we probably didn't want in our system, to be honest. A majority of those people, I can tell you one of them in the screening interview, the response of, why did you want to become a school librarian? And they said, well, because I think it'd be a nice job because, when you're done at the end of the day, you can just go home at 4 o'clock and not take anything home to work on. And if you know anything now, A, bad response. 2, the reality is true, the librarian doesn't take home papers to grade necessarily. I did every once in a while, depending on what work I was doing with a class. And yes, I pretty much tried not to take work home, but I also worked until 6, 7 o'clock at night at the school, just so that I didn't take it home so I could have some balance, that when I was home, I was home. And that we're not necessarily, quote, a testing grade, so we don't have the same type of accountability thresholds that other teachers have. The reality is that the stress that good librarians have is all self-imposed. It's because you want to make that difference. You want to get this teacher to understand what you can do for them. You want those kids to be more successful. And you add different layers of programming and other things, and they pile up on each other. And it isn't that my principal was over my shoulder saying, well, where is X, Y, and Z? It was myself saying, no, this is what I want to do, and in order to get this all done, I have to get this done tonight. So that was part of the passion that you can't teach. If you have a passion for the work that you do, rarely do I ever come home and say I've had a bad day. I may have had a challenging day. I may have had a disappointing day, but rarely have I ever come home and said it was a bad day. Because we're very fortunate. Our work is so varied that if one thing goes bad, I just switch the task to something else to make it a good day.
All right, so how about we close with the magic mix? And if anybody has a question, please jump in. But Rick, let me think about, I'm going to go back to the question in a minute, but Rick, if you could think of the 3 things you want to demonstrate in an interview, passion might be number 1. But keep that in mind. I heard somebody's voice, and I don't want to let a question go unrealized. So was it Liz?
Yeah. I was going to ask what an example of a recent graduate student's portfolio that totally wowed you looked like.
It's a really good question. If it included student work, if it includes the student work, because you can give me a lesson plan, you can give me, the brochure or pamphlet you created, but I don't know what effect it had. But if it includes the student work, then I can see the effect it had on students. So if you're still doing field work and student teaching and those things, I don't know, where you are, whether it is actually library work that was done in the library, or if you're a classroom teacher, that's transferable. So if you're in the classroom already, demonstrate how you got students to use various types of information. And you might show a student at the low end, the middle, and the high, and you would then be able to, if I asked about it, I would say, explain these 3 artifacts to me. What are these 3 things in front of me? And you would say, this is the student that was struggling. And just don't leave it there. Instead, you also say, and for this student, I know what I need to do next, and this is what we're going to do next with this student, or what we did do next. This student here is performing on what we need them to do. This is the area that they need to increase on, and this student here could teach what we were teaching because they demonstrated excellence on it. You being able to articulate why you put things in the portfolio is very important. But when I go through a portfolio and all I see is a brochure on pumpkin books, a library newsletter that I can tell, yeah, I don't think that really all happened. This was put together for an assignment. Oh, here is a family literacy night um, advertisement. If you're doing that, you better have the pictures from the family literacy night. You better have like the agenda for the night and the program and all of the other things that go with it. Make sure that when they're looking at the portfolio, they can tell that you did something with it and what was the impact of that. So a portfolio with just documents in it doesn't work for me. I want to see what effect did it have.
And that's a portfolio that you would bring to the interview versus one that you would post online and LinkedIn, correct?
It could be either. It could really be either. If you include student work, just make sure that you're following the guidelines of where you're working or under your agreement for field experience to know what you can post or can't post. Just make sure that you protect yourself that way.
Yeah, New Jersey has some quite strict laws about personal identifiable information being posted.
Right. So what we do is we tape over and photocopy, because if you use a black Sharpie, half the time you can still see through it, so you tape over it, or just cut it out and make a photocopy of it or scan it at that point. And then once the name is off, rarely you can ever tell who actually really did the work from that point on.
Thank you.
We can't hear you, Joyce.
Are you saying that you'd like us to say good night now and to make sure that we thank our presenters? Okay. Thank you very much. Your advice has probably been the best interview advice I've ever gotten in my life, and this is my third career, so thank you. That's very, very wise.
You're welcome. Thank you. Everyone have a great night, and if you have follow-up questions, you can let Joyce know what they are, and she can forward those to me. Good night.